welcome back to the latest episode of the RBL Podcast. And today, well, what should we talk about, guys? I think, given last time we talked a little bit about the standings and maybe how the playoff competition was suiting up as we kind of hit that halfway mark in the league season, as well as a little bit at the top 10 of the upcoming draft. And of course, we'll go back to both elements of that, I think, as in the coming weeks, and certainly be talking about that as we get nearer to the playoffs and nearer to the draft as well. But I thought today, in this episode, it would be an interesting thing to maybe talk about some of the interesting bits of news that have happened, and in particular, the past week where we have seen several players come out publicly and demand a trade from their team. So, in today's episode, what I thought we would do is we would have a look at those players who are interested in trying to trade and trying to move, and see if we can find them a happy home, see what abilities they have, see where they may be best placed to really bring that talent that they may have to another team. So we're going to begin, I think, with Chicago in terms of Tom Bullwinkle, who demanded a trade, and he essentially said that he wants to play. So, in terms of thinking about that, let's take a little look at Tom Bullwinkle and just see how good is he and what can he bring to a team. This is a guy who surprisingly wants to play, but he has managed 19 minutes per game previously, and his numbers have looked pretty good historically, with all respect. But he's never going to be the starter type player that you probably want. But what can he bring to a team? I mean, given he is 32, he is a veteran. He's probably in the back end of his career now, and well, it's quite clear that anyone who's looking at this, he is a guy who basically brings rebounding and a bit of defense to a team. His offensive rebounding, his defensive rebounding ratings are pretty good. He is 7 foot, he is weighted at 665 pounds, and his post defense is a 57. So it's pretty solid. We can ignore his potentials because, let's be honest, he's 32. He's not going to get to them now at this stage, and he's not exactly the most athletic player, given that his stamina is 67, his strength is 57. And he's not exactly quick or got good jumping ability now. But, with that respect, his shooting numbers are not atrocious. They're bordering on sort of drop off. So I think in terms of where we think about Tom Bullwinkle, we have to consider this is a guy who wants to play minutes. He probably is going to be looking for a role where he's going to give you that 20 minutes per game, 15, 20 minutes per game, coming in, giving a good clip, giving you just a bit of rebounding, and just basically giving your starters a rest. So what types of teams would be on the lookout for this type of player? That is the question. Of course, being 32, we are not going to be looking at teams in rebuilding, teams that are not in the playoff hunt, because they are certainly not going to want to pay to take on a 32-year-old and give him his last chance, really, in terms of game time. Of course, we also need to consider that he is a player that most teams probably already have someone filling that role at this moment in time. But there are a few teams, I think, in that playoff hunt who maybe could find him a home and maybe could give him some of those minutes. And the first one I'm going to turn over to is the Golden State Warriors. So the Golden State Warriors are in an interesting position. They do have some front court presence. Obviously, they have the likes of Robert Parrish, who is their elite sort of front court player. He is, of course, paired up with the Clifford Ray, a really good front court player as well. So they've got a really good starting two there. But beyond that, I mean, we've got Wesley Cox, who's 6'6". He's a bit undersized. He's not probably the right piece to kind of throw in and give the minutes to. Same with Larry McNeil. He's not the world's greatest player. He's proven he can do okay in very limited minutes. But Mr. Bullwinkle could probably come in there and probably play that third supporting cast, giving the likes of Robert Parrish and Clifford Ray those resting minutes that they probably desperately need. And it might bring their front court up to being less of a drop-off from when one of those two guys kind of come out of the court at this stage. And, given that their backcourt is pretty elite, maybe that'll help Golden State if they consider that, bringing him in. So I could see him being a perfect fit for Golden State going forward. There is one other team that I think is worth giving a shout-out to consider here, and that is the Atlanta Hawks. So, looking at this, they obviously have True Rollins, who is their elite sort of defensive centre. A lot of their scoring is obviously coming from the wing. They do have the likes of Tom McMillan, solid rebounder, not the greatest defender in terms of front court presence. And then they have the likes of Steve Hawes, who's solid enough. Obviously, a starter position. But beyond that, they kind of don't have much else. They have Scott Lloyd, who kind of is average at most things, I would probably say. And John Brown, who is probably really shouldn't be in the rotation at this stage. So I could see him coming in and being a very similar role set to what he would be in Golden State. Coming in and just taking up some of those minutes off of Scott Lloyd, probably John Brown, maybe it's Tom McMillan, and just allowing sort of True Rollins, Steve Hawes to continue to have the resting minutes that they need. So I can see him being quite a solid fit there for them in particular. So yeah, I think there's a market for Tom Bullwinkle. I just think it's a case of you're not going to get a lot for him. He's 32. He brings a very specific set of skills. You're kind of looking for someone maybe saying, look, I'll throw you maybe a youngster who's a gamble or maybe a second round pick and kind of move on from it. So that brings us to our next player that's been announced a trade demand, and that is Phil Walker of the Washington Bullets. So let's take a little look at hang on, let's just go back for a second and just see what he actually said in the news article. I'm assuming it's very similar. Yeah, look, he just wants to play, and he wants to play for a team. So again, similar scenario. We're looking for a team that maybe could give him some minutes and showcase what he can do probably, or maybe fill a need. So if we look at Phil Walker, when we look at his ability, he is 21, so he has age on his side. He doesn't have a huge amount of room for potential. And he's quite a unique player in a sense that he is 6'3". He's listed here as a power forward. I clearly don't think that is the case. His handling and passing ability is not great. It's below average. He can kind of play defense okay. He's got good athletic ability. So you kind of, whilst he is 21, you might say that he could possibly develop into being a specialist defensive type player. A guy who just comes in, just fills the gap, gives you defense, and if you can get some of those shooting numbers up, given that his minutes maybe increase, you might be looking at a guy who could probably be a third string, I think, in the future. So I'm considering Phil Walker as being a guard rather than being this front court player that is listed to be here. So when we think about that, what types of teams maybe are looking at a young guard that they can give some minutes to and just see if he can develop into that kind of piece? Well, obviously the first one is the Cleveland Cavaliers. So they do have a bunch of players. They're obviously looking at moving Austin Carr. Again, he's 29. He's not going to necessarily develop any further. Henry Bibby, a 28-year-old, and Lou Dampier, obviously experienced veteran now at this stage. But they've not really got any youngsters in that backcourt. So maybe they could give him a go, throw some minutes at him, see if he can spark something, develop. Who knows? Maybe worth a shout out there, really, for the Cavaliers. Another team that I think might be worth considering is, again, it's the Kings. So again, similar sort of situation. They do have Andre McCarter, who's probably could also fill that role, but they maybe could throw him some minutes and see if he can outplay McCarter for that third string. They got the likes of Ron Boone, who is 31 and realistically not part of the time frame for this team now, and John Kuster, who probably could develop to be that starting point guard in the future. So maybe an option there for him as well. I think the final team that I was going to give a shout out to for this one was the Boston Celtics. So when we look at the Boston Celtics, they've got the likes of Charlie Scott, a good veteran, solid enough. Dave Bling, again, veteran. But beyond that, they don't have, again, much youth in the backcourt. So you're looking at the likes of Fred Sanders, who's 26, and maybe you throw him some minutes and see if he can outpace some of these guys, or maybe demonstrate something there. But I don't think you're going to be getting any actual value for him if you're looking to trade him. I think given he might just be a throw-in for another trade, that's kind of where I see Walker's sort of trade value being at this moment in time. But, maybe he gets cut. Maybe one of these teams picks him up and gives a flyer on him. I don't know. We'll see. That brings us on to Gary Brokaw from the Buffalo Braves. So, again, he's looking for playing time. No surprise, he's not really getting playing time with the Braves. Let's take a little look at him and see what he could possibly bring. So if we find him here. So he is an interesting prospect in the sense that he is 23 years old and he's got some room to grow, but he's got some quite positive things. I think he is a good, he's a below average defender in most areas, but he can kind of do a bit of everything. His athleticism is pretty good. He's never going to be the ball handling guy. He's going to be very much limited to playing shooting guard. He's probably a bit undersized to play small forward, and he doesn't have the rebounding ability to kind of throw there. But having said that, I think his inside shot's not terrible. He can make a 3-throw. His jump shot is atrocious, and he's never going to make a 3-point shot. But he could be a guy who maybe similar situation to Walker. Maybe you could see him anywhere playing 8 to 10 minutes a night, and probably filling a need there. He doesn't have that room to grow. That's the problem with him being at 23 years old. You kind of, if you had room to grow, I think people would be more interested in sort of taking him on. In terms of where I see him going, it's a similar kind of story. I mean, I don't have a specific team in mind for him, unlike the other guys we've recommended. I think it's a case of anyone in sort of non-playoff territory might take a flyer on him. Again, I don't see him having an actual trade value. But, it might be one that he gets cut and moved around. That's kind of where I see him sort of ending up, really. So that brings us on to two other more interesting players in a sense, which is, we'll start with the Suns and the likes of James Silas. Again, looking for playing time. Let's take a look at him. If we head on over to the Suns and Silas. So Silas is an interesting player in the sense that he is 28, so he is not going to have any development room. You can ignore that now. But he has some a really good jump shot, good inside shot. His passing handling's okay. His defense is pretty acceptable, and his athletic abilities are pretty good. He is 6'2". I think you could probably get away in a pinch in playing a bit of point guard. Really, he's going to be a shooting guard though. And his numbers have looked pretty good this season. I mean, in the 12 minutes he's played, his numbers look okay. I mean, if we go over to his shooting efficiencies, he's looking okay. His PR's okay. His usage has been not too bad. His defensive efficiency has not been great. That's interesting. But his actual numbers look okay. I mean, his inside shot is pretty good. That jump shot at 47% is not atrocious. So there is probably a market for him in the sense that I could see a team giving him like 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and seeing if he can accelerate some of these scoring numbers that he's got. Maybe there is an opportunity here for him. So what do I think? I'm probably looking at a team here that needs a shooting guard and a guy who can come in and just fill that need, really. And the first one I have on the list is the Chicago Bulls. Given that their shooting guard position is pretty weak at the minute, I mean, we can talk a little bit about Tate Armstrong being an okay youngster who can play a bit of defense. John Mengley, who, again, shooting numbers are not too bad, but his actual field goal drop-off has been really, really bad this year. His defense is pretty average, and his handling and ball handling ability is pretty poor. So I could see him coming in and probably taking a starting role on this team at this moment in time. That's kind of where I could see that. I mean, maybe a 6-man role, but I could see him certainly coming in and really helping Chicago get towards that playoff hunt. So I could see them, looking at that move and seeing that being quite interesting for them. There is another team, and that is a team that I think most people wouldn't necessarily assume needs a shooting guard at this moment in time. But I could see him fitting in here. I mean, they've got Doug Collins and Pete Maravich, so they've got two really, really good shooting guards. Obviously, we can talk about Pete Maravich sort of being on day-to-day, and you're probably sitting there going, why on earth am I suggesting the Jazz as an option for him? And the reason being is that, look, Pete Maravich is 30. He's had injuries. Doug Collins is 26. There is a huge drop off from those two guys into everyone else. And whether you throw Nate Williams in there, I don't know. I don't think he's really suited for that. Or you throw in one of the point guards. I can't necessarily see that happening. So I could see him coming in and being that third string guy, and maybe not necessarily playing the high minutes he would if he was with the Chicago Bulls. But I could certainly see him getting 10 to 12 minutes a game sitting in here, just to give these two guys actual rest time through the season. And then come playoff time, I think they'll tighten the roster down and the depth chart and everything. But yeah, so I think there is definitely a market for Silas. And I could see him moving, to be honest with you, given that he wants to trade. And then that brings us to our final player on the list. And this is probably the most interesting one, given that Dave Swazik was highlighted, obviously, in a previous mini podcast that we had here as one of those underrated players in this season, and he did get injured, unfortunately, and even more surprising, he's now demanding a trade about playing time even though he's been injured. So read into that what you want, and whether he just wants out of the Trailblazers because he just doesn't like the situation, or whether he's just moaning that he's injured. He's out for another 49 days, but he's going to miss a fair chunk of the season up until the trade deadline. So you'd be taking a bit of a gamble on him at this stage. But he is probably the best player that's demanded a trade so far. I mean, his shooting numbers have been really good this season. He's good passing handling is okay. He can play point guard. His defense is pretty good, and his athleticism is still pretty good. So he definitely will have a market. Do I think he's necessarily worth that first round pick gamble? I think for certain teams he probably might be. And I can certainly see that playing out. I mean, if we look at his shooting numbers, they've looked good. I mean, his jump shot kind of gone a bit missing this year, but his inside game has been really, really good. So I could see him going into a playoff team and really playing 20, 25 minutes probably. But it's going to be the certain playoff team. Unlike Silas that we talked about, who I think has a market, but it's a very specific market. I think there's going to be a fair few teams interested in Swazik. So first one I've got on my list is the Pistons. So the Pistons do have the likes of Chris Ford, who's a pretty good shooting guard and having a fairly solid season so far. But he's not a scorer. He is a defensive specialist guard. And then they've got the likes of Ralph Sampson, who, again, defensive specialist guard really. They do need scoring at that position. And I think he could come in and potentially take that. I mean, imagine a situation where you can flip between Chris Ford and Dave Swazik at the shooting guard position. That's pretty amazing, to be honest with you. And, I think also for the Pistons, he could fill a gap between Kevin Porter and Eric Money, because Eric Money's not the world's greatest point guard. He is, again, a defensive specialist. So I could see him taking some of those minutes as well. So I could see him probably coming in and being a really heavy minute 6-man guy for the Pistons in particular. And I think that'd be a really nice fit for him. There is another team that I have on my list who I think is an interesting one. Let's just jump over to the Supersonics. The Supersonics are, again, they kind of don't have that shooting guard position beyond Fred Brown. And we know Fred Brown is an absolute star and amazing talent, to be honest with you. One of the best players in the league at the position. But, the drop-off is huge. They've got Al Fleming, who, let's be honest, will not want him to play 6 minutes a game. So they've got 6 minutes there to play with. And Joe Hassett, again, he's looked okay, but he's not as good as Dave Swazik. So I could see him coming in and taking those minutes. And a similar situation in terms of the point guard. I mean, Gus Williams is obviously a very, very good point guard. But then they've got to rely on Slick Watts, who is okay defensively. I know Seattle have looked to start to try and think about trading him. His shooting numbers are certainly down, and I could see him filling a similar role in terms of the Pistons here and being a really, really good fit for them. So I think, do I think Swazik, out of all the others, Swazik is going to be the most valuable out of everyone we've talked about? Absolutely. Could I see a team throwing a first round pick at him? I think yeah. I mean, if we're sitting here and the standings stay the same for the Western Conference, we're talking about the Pistons who are 21-16, Supersonics who are 20-16. Maybe they think that having him coming at the trade deadline gets them above the Trailblazers, definitely, because they're essentially taking that talent away from the Trailblazers, and certainly will take them. I think they'll give them that nice cushion and gap between the Bulls, the Suns, the Warriors, who are kind of fighting for those other places. They could be sitting here and looking at this and going, Pistons are one game behind the Nuggets, and maybe that's enough for them to take the division and give them that precious home court advantage that they're probably going to look for in the playoffs. So, yeah, I think there's definitely an opportunity for them to throw a first round pick in here. It might be a low to mid first round pick, but yeah, I think that's an interesting prospect for him in particular. So yeah, that kind of brings us to a little bit of a close for today's episode. Like I said, it was going to be a narrow focus on some of those guys demanding trades and where they could possibly end up. Of course, always interested if you've got other ideas of where these guys could end up, what their value is. Of course, let me know. Drop in the comments on here or on Discord. And yeah, we'll be back next time, I think, probably to talk about the draft and talk about the top 10 to the 10 to 20 sort of selection. And I'll just put the preview up here so you can kind of get your mouths watering at who that looks like. So we're probably going to be looking at sort of Freeman Williams down to the likes of Roger Fegley as we move in towards the next episode. And yeah, we are very close to the All-Star break now. It's this month, and then obviously the trade deadline. So, maybe some of these guys will be traded between now and then. Maybe there'll be other guys, and we'll talk about some of that trade reaction as well. But yeah, we'll see what plays out. Who knows? Maybe when we come back next time, one of these guys will have moved on to another team and found that playing time that they deserve. But I'll be keeping an eye on it. I'll be watching, as well as all the action in the RBL.